Hi, I'm pretty excited about tonight. We're going to be painting a landscape. Finally, we've been doing paints and brushes and paper and those sorts of things, and now we're finally on to the enjoyable part, which is painting landscape. That's what I love to do. So tonight we're just going to be using two colours, cobalt blue, yellow ochre, and we're going to create quite a complex landscape from very simple processes. So if you have a look at this landscape here, that's what we're going to be painting tonight. And you're going to know by the end of it how to paint this painting. It might not end up being exactly the same, but you'll know how to paint a painting like this. So stay with me as I take you step by step through this process, and make sure that if you've got any questions, then ask them in the comments below. If you like this video, then press like. And if you want to know about future videos that I'm going to be posting every week, then press the subscribe button and press the bell button, and you'll get a notification when I put my next video up. So thanks for joining me, and let's get stuck into it. Thanks for joining me tonight. We're going to be looking at painting a simple watercolour landscape tonight. We're going to be using some Arches medium 300 GSM paper. This one's A3, but it doesn't really matter. Came in 15 sheets. Generally these pads are a bit cheaper than the gummed blocks, but not always. And because for a lot of people painting in watercolour, this is quite a large size to paint on. What we're going to do, especially if you're beginning, we're going to divide this into quarters, and we're going to end up painting a small landscape on about a quarter of this, okay? So that's what we're going to use, and it doesn't really matter, but about postage, about postcard size is a very good size to start with. And we're still going to be, if you want to know more about brushes or paints or papers, then just refer to my previous videos. But we're still going to be using, even though we're going to be using a postcard sized piece of paper, we're still going to be using brushes about this sort of size, because it's much easier to just lay down nice loose washes, and we'll also use our nice round sable. And I've got coming in the mail soon, like a reasonably, like it's not a $12 round sable like this one, which is a bit rubbish. So I've got about a $40 sable coming instead of this $200 one coming in the mail soon from Amazon, and we'll see how that performs, so that I can give you guys some feedback as to sort of what brushes to use if you don't want to go out and spend a fortune. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So just bear with me while I just get ready, and we'll go from there. Thanks. And so normally I would use a razor blade and use a chopping board, but I can't find my nice sharp razor blade. It's gone somewhere. So obviously if this is the board that you're attaching the painting to, you don't want to cut on the surface that you're painting on, and so I'll just cut on the reversed surface. So it's totally fine to do that. So when I'm cutting, I use this metre long metal ruler. It's very handy for doing not just cutting the paper up, but also to lift out lights using a razor blade, which I'll show you in a later video. And also what's worth realising is that what I've found to be the very cheapest way of buying paper is generally to find a paper supplier. Like I found Melbourne etching supplies, obviously down in Melbourne in Australia, and I can buy probably about 50 sheets from them, and it ends up costing me a lot less than when I buy these pads. But the good thing about the pads is you don't need a set of map drawers like I've got down here. You can see a bit of that. You don't need a set of map drawers like this, so that's why these pads are very handy to begin with. And you're not going to damage paper, because if you don't have somewhere to store your paper, then you could damage it. So we'll get started with this one. Alright, I'm just going to hook you up so you're looking from above, and then you'll have a much better view. Cool. So the first thing we need to remember when we're doing this is to tape this down. And I use 3M magic tape because it sticks very well. There we go. And I just push it down on the edges where it attaches onto the paper, and then push it down onto the board. So I'm just mixing this wash up. I sprayed that water in before. You're always best off not putting in too much water, and I'm using a hog's hair bristle brush here to just mix it up. And what I'm really looking for is to make sure that I'm mixing it to a point where I've found the bottom of this porcelain dish. Again, have a look at some of my previous videos if you want to look at how to mix paints up and that sort of thing. But all I've done with these paints is just recharge these paints by spraying some water in and just letting it sit there for a little while. So this is part of the process of getting ready to paint, and obviously it's what makes painting with washes more time consuming, but at the same time rather than hard pans. But the beautiful thing you can do once you've got washes is just lovely. So we'll see how that goes. So this is cobalt blue that I'm mixing up here, and that's pretty good to go. I'll just get rid of that cobalt blue. We'll mix up this yellow ochre. These are Winsor and Newton artist quality paints, but also in a previous video I was using Cotman student quality, and I tested cobalt blue and yellow ochre, and they were very similar. So there's no problems. You just use whatever paints you can get. But just realise that they will behave slightly differently on the page, and if you move from student to artist quality, you might have to just get used to a paint behaving in a certain way. But the worst thing to happen would be for the price to be prohibitive for you starting to paint. That's the most important thing, is to just start painting. So whatever you can afford to get, you just start painting. So I shouldn't really be mixing this paint on top of my paper. If I was doing this, normally I would move my paper completely out of the way in case I splash, because of course that could ruin your paper. So you would normally want to mix this. And I'm using hog's hair again. I've got a brush for warm colours and another brush for cool colours. We're just going to do a simple landscape tonight. And that's probably enough, and probably a good consistency. After a while you get to know how thick you like your washes. It's not that they have to be a certain way, but I do like them quite thick. I suppose it's almost like pouring cream, I suppose. That would be something that would be similar to. So we'll just put that one up here for now. Put that one up there for now. So what I'm going to do now, so what we're going to do here is a reverse graduated wash. The first wash we're going to do is to start with the yellow wash, so the yellow ochre, and if this was the top of our page here, then we're going to turn it upside down here, and this is not going to be wet in wet, this is just going to be a graduated wash. So I'll do a little bit and then I might zoom in a bit, but I just wanted you to be able to see that we're starting with a dry paper here, it's all fastened down, and then we're just going to load up our sable. So you get a good amount of paint on that brush and then take it across here like this. You can do that a couple of times if you want, but then what you're going to do is get a bit of water, take a bit off, and then, so you can see here I'm keeping this board quite angled, and potentially I made my wash a little bit thick, and you would find that out quite quickly. And so what I'm doing is I'm just taking across the page, I'm dipping it into the water, getting rid of a little bit of that pigment, and then taking it across again. You could go and fix some of those imperfections that I'm creating, but I think sometimes the imperfections in watercolour are what make it beautiful. And it's good if you're doing a graduated wash to just take it all the way to the bottom of the page. Again, I'm keeping my page completely upright. There we go. And then I'm just going to clean, so I just flicked my brush out and I'm just going to clean up around the edges here. And again, just clean up around the edges here. There we go. And the other thing that you might want to do before you go putting it down is just to clean up here. Clean up here. You don't want to get the tissue onto the page because that could disrupt it, but it's good to just clean it all up. And that's the other nice thing about using this tape, is that you get to see the painting with a border. So you can see that there. I'll just zoom in for a second. I don't know if you can see that very well. Doesn't seem to be zooming in particularly well, but you can see there's a bit of a line there. It's not a beautifully graduated wash. That was because the wash was a bit thick. But that's the thing with watercolor, is that sometimes some of those things that occur are not a big problem, and you can use them. It's what makes watercolor really exciting, definitely. So we dry that. So what we'll do now is I'll just get the hairdryer and just dry it. So that's something that you're going to need. And when I'm drying it, what I'm noticing is at the moment the page is bowed up like that. It means it's wet. So initially when I'm drying it, I'm not going to touch it at all because I could disturb that pigment. But as I'm drying it, I start to notice it flatten down. I can just start to touch it a bit and feel it and make sure that it's completely dry. And I'll know it's completely dry when it's gone completely flat. Alright, so we can turn this back the other way now. And what we're going to do next is with the cobalt blue. So we've made sure our brush is washed out. We're using the round sable again. And again, we're going to tilt it up. So we'll load up with some cobalt blue. Again, I could have made this wash a little bit thick, but it's okay, we'll deal with that. So you're going to take the paint across there. You can do that a couple of times and make sure you've got a bit of paint across there. And then you're just going to dip that in there into the water jar and then come back again. And then dip it in, and then we might pass across there again. Sometimes when the paper is warm, it dries quite quickly, so you can't take too long. And as you can see, with gravity, it's just helping that pigment to move down the page. There we go. All right. So now we just dry it. Alright, so the next step we're going to do is just to use a bit of cobalt blue, and this time what we're going to do is just weaken it a bit. So I work on my desk with I use the desk as a palette, but you could just use a bit in a different thing, in a different bowl, and just weaken that wash a bit. Just weaken it. That's beautiful. Lovely. So as you can see, or not see at all, it's quite a weak wash. So as you can see here, we're not doing any pencil drawings, and you could, if you wanted to do a pencil drawing, you could, but all we're going to do is come in with some distant mountains, you know, and generally they might be a bit jaggedy in the distance, and then we're just going to bring that down and then water that out a bit. And then take that all the way down to there, and then we can clean that up a bit. Lovely. And as you can see, there's a nice bit of brightness here. That might be just taking a little bit of light just off this part here, so I can use a tissue, and I can, while it's still a little bit damp, I could just, if it still hasn't dried yet, I could just take a little bit of light off that. so that the light is just catching potentially, and you've got to turn the tissue each time you do that. Lovely. So we can just dry that. So as you can see down here, the pigment is behaving in an interesting way, and that's because it's very, very thick pigment that I put down there, and so the water's not running over the top of it, it's just stopping. So that's what you learn after a while with watercolour, is that there's lots of rules that it follows, and you just need to get used to what those rules are. So the next thing we'll do is just bring in some middle ground and perhaps even down into some foreground here. And again, you can just start to imagine, sometimes it's good to step right back and think about this landscape and what it wants to turn into. So you could do anything you wanted, obviously, but this is likely to be distant here. There's likely to be some middle ground and then some foreground, and so and we'll just keep this simple because that's what we're meant to be doing. So all I'm going to do is, if you have a look at this, all I'm going to do is just make that a little bit thicker, add a bit more. And you don't really need to do this. You could just do this exercise with just one strength pigment, but I'm just making this a little bit thicker, just a little bit stronger. Here we go. So again, I don't know if you can see that, but it's just a little bit stronger out of the very strong wash that I've got. So we'll just put in some rolling heels. It doesn't have to be perfect at all. And then we'll just smooth that out. And we could choose to do something interesting there, but we'll just, for the sake of this exercise, we'll just keeping it simple. So I don't really love that, so I'm going to get a little bit more of the stronger pigment, because that's always a good way to go. And we might just bring that in there. And we'll just smooth that out. There we go. We might even and what we might do is we might just get our fan brush, and we might just give a little bit of detail here to this. And we might just, again, take a little bit of light, that is a little bit solid. There we go. Alright, we'll dry that. So what we're going to do next is just put in a bit of water, and I use 3M magic tape for this. So the good thing about this is it won't damage the paper, and so I just put it on and press it down on the edge I want to do, and then I'm using this flat nylon brush. I load it up with water, and then I get rid of a fair bit of that water so that there's not too much. You've just got to learn that by trial and error, really. So you've just got to learn how much water to have on that brush by trial and error, really. But you could give it a quick flick out if you're able to, somewhere, just a quick flick, and that'll probably be quite good. Or you can use a tissue and just take a little bit of the water off it. But you do need some there, so a bit of a flick, maybe a little bit of a touch on the paper, and then it's good to go. Like we just, yep. And then what you want to do is along that paper is just run that brush back and forth, and you can do it and not touch the page until you just do. So just And then you can bring some of that down into here if you would like, especially if there's some light here hitting across here. And then you want to get a nice fresh piece of tissue and bring that across. Probably get rid of that, get another new tissue. Another new tissue. You don't want to put dirty tissue onto the paper. So then that's done now. And then we can get this and take that off this way. And that helps us create the look of some water. And then we need to dry that. And then what we can do right at the end is just bring in a bit of foreground. We might even just load up with another brush so I don't dirty that one. And then, so I've just used create some grasses here with a fan brush. And then we could even get the spray bottle if we wanted and just spray a little bit onto there, just to help the paint to run down. Grab the tissue, mop up. Alright, so we'll dry that. Great, so I think that's pretty much finished now, and so I don't know if you can see that very well, but we've used two colours, that's cobalt blue and yellow ochre, to create quite a complex landscape, but actually very simple processes really. So we've created quite a complex landscape using quite simple processes. So if you remember, we started with the reverse graduated wash of yellow ochre, so we turned it up this way, we turned it upside down, and then we did a reverse graduated wash this way, and then we turned it back this way, obviously drying in between each one, and then we did a cobalt blue graduated wash and then dried it, and then we did these distant mountains in a weaker wash, and then we got a stronger wash and laid in this middle ground here and graduated that down, then dried it. And obviously we lifted out some lights along the way to make it so it wasn't quite so solid. Once we dried that, we lifted out some lights here of the water, wiped that out, and then dried it again. And then we did some foreground here with some grasses. Now if we wanted to take that even a little bit further, we of course could use a razor blade here to just lift out a few lights here of grasses. And we could work on that for a long time, but that's probably something for another video at some stage. But we could definitely work on this for a long time. We could even spray this. Spray this, see where the water is, and then lift out some lights of the grasses and the light catching the grasses. So again, I don't know if you can see that up close. That light hitting the grasses. But hopefully you can see some of that. So watercolour is just absolutely beautiful. You can get some beautiful effects. It's just two colours and some very simple techniques that absolutely anyone can do. And that's the thing, at no stage did we do any drawing there. You don't really need to know how to draw, you just need to know how to put marks on the page. So that's great. And the last thing is, of course, to sign it. Lovely. Right. And so once you've finished the painting, what you want to do is just peel this tape off. And so you always peel away from the paper. Peel away from the paper. And that's the nice thing about using that tape, is that you get a beautiful white edge around your piece of paper, and it just helps you to see what the finished product is going to look like. The other thing you can do is get some mat boards, and I'll show you them at some stage, that you can put around your painting. Yes, so I'll show you at some stage some mat boards. You can put them around your painting, and that, again, once you put that on top, it can help you to really see what it's going to look like as a finished product.